Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. And today we are going to be diving into
Oh,
The
yeah.
48 Laws of Power
It's a good one.
by Robert Greene.
A very popular
A
one.
very popular one, a very controversial one.
Yeah, very controversial.
And one that I think we can all
Hmm.
take some lessons from.
Yeah. So,
So this book,
yeah, what's this book all about?
this book is about understanding power dynamics.
Okay.
And it's framed as a game.
Okay.
So just like any game, there are rules to this game.
Yeah.
And Robert Greene lays out 48
Mm-hmm.
of these
48 roles.
laws of power. And he doesn't say these laws are moral or immoral. He just says they're effective.
Interesting. So it's less about being a good person and more about understanding how to play the game.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this book so interesting. It really dives into the kind of the underbelly of human behavior,
Mm-hmm.
the things that we don't always like to talk about.
Right. And I think we've all had those moments where we've felt powerless in a situation, whether it's at work, in a relationship, or even just out, just out in the world.
Yeah. And I think if you can understand these rules, these unspoken rules of power, it can give you a little bit more agency.
Totally. And I think that's kind of what Greene is getting at. He's not saying that you need to go out and become this Machiavellian manipulator,
Right.
but understanding these laws can be a form of self-defense too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because if you know the rules,
Yeah.
you can kind of see them being played, and then you can decide how you want to react.
Totally. And I think one of the interesting things about this book is that it's not about right or wrong. It's just about what works.
Yeah. It's about what is.
What is.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's what makes it so controversial, because he doesn't make any value judgments.
Right. It's up to the reader to decide what they're going to do with this information.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the power of the book, is that it really forces you to confront your own beliefs about power and your own ethics.
Yeah, for sure. So should we dive into some of these laws?
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right. So one that I found really interesting was Law 1.
Okay.
Never outshine the master.
That's a big one.
It seems counterintuitive, right? Like,
Mhm.
shouldn't we be trying to be the best all the time?
It's funny because, like, in today's society, we're always told, like, be the best. You can be the best. Be
Right.
number one.
Hustle harder.
Right.
Yeah. But this is saying kind of the opposite.
Yeah. Well, I think about it this way. Have you ever, like, been in a situation where you maybe accidentally made your boss feel insecure?
Oh, totally.
Or a mentor, or someone who's in a position of power over you?
Like, I once gave a presentation
Yeah.
without running it by my manager first.
Oh.
And he wasn't angry about it,
Right.
but I could tell that he felt a little bit,
Oh, yeah. A little slighted.
yeah.
And that's what this law is getting at. It's like, you don't want to make the people above you feel threatened.
Interesting. So it's more about, like, making them feel comfortable in their power.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point, because a lot of times, like, we think about power as the zero-sum game.
Right.
Like, if I have power, you don't have power. But I think what Greene is saying is that actually power can be something that's shared,
Okay.
and it can be something that's actually more effective when it's shared.
Interesting. So it's not always about, like, taking the power for yourself. It's about kind of like recognizing that power dynamics exist
Mm-hmm.
and then navigating them in a way that
Yeah.
works for you.
That's beneficial for everyone.
Yeah.
It's about being strategic.
Yeah.
It's not about being a doormat or letting people walk all over you.
Right.
It's about understanding that sometimes the best way to get what you want is to make sure that the people above you feel secure.
Okay. So it's more nuanced than just, like, trying to climb the ladder and step on everyone on the way up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about playing the game strategically and understanding the kind of the psychology of power.
Right. Okay. So that was Law 1, never outshine the master.
That's a good one.
What about Law 6? This one I found really fascinating. Court attention at all costs.
Ooh, that's a juicy one.
Yeah. He's saying that it's better to be hated than ignored.
Mm.
And it makes me think of that saying all press is good press.
Right. And I think about, like, some of the most famous or infamous people throughout history.
Yeah.
Like, they may not have always been the most virtuous,
Right.
but they certainly knew how to get attention.
Yes, like they knew how to make a splash.
Right. Whether it was through, bold actions or, just a very distinct personal style.
Strong personal brand.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, you think about someone like, let's say, like a Lady Gaga.
Yeah.
Like, she is someone who has always courted attention.
Very deliberately.
Very deliberately. And you could argue that that's part of her power.
Right, because even if you don't like her music, you know who she is.
Exactly. And you're talking about her.
Right.
And that's what this law is getting at. It's like being ignored is like the worst thing that can happen to you if you're trying to gain power.
It's like you're invisible.
Yeah. And Greene talks about how like even negative attention is better than no attention.
Interesting. So it's almost like any attention will give you some kind of power.
Yeah, I think that's what he's getting at.
Okay. So it's not about being liked. It's about being seen.
Mm-hmm. Being noticed. Being memorable.
Okay. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay. I need to hear about Law 21. This one's called Play a Sucker to Catch a Sucker. Seem dumber than your mark.
This is a fun one.
Yeah. Is he actually telling us to play dumb?
Well, it's not about literally being dumb.
Okay.
It's about strategically downplaying your intelligence or your abilities
Okay.
to make your opponent underestimate you.
So it's like a mind game.
It is a mind game. It's like, think about like a magician.
Okay.
They use misdirection
Right.
to get you to look at one hand while they're doing something sneaky with the other hand.
Okay.
And that's kind of what this law is about. It's like you're creating a distraction.
Interesting. So how do you actually like pull this off in real life? Like how do you seem dumber than you are without looking like you're actually incompetent?
Well, I think it's about like, maybe letting your opponent win a few minor arguments
Okay.
to boost their ego.
Yeah.
Or, maybe feigning ignorance on certain topics to make them feel more knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm.
It's about like creating a false sense of security.
Got it.
So they think they're in control, but actually you're the one who's pulling the strings.
Okay. So it's like you're kind of like setting a trap.
Yeah. It's a long game.
Okay. I like it.
Yeah.
Do you have any like historical examples of this working in action?
Yeah, so one of the classic examples that Greene uses in the book is the story of the Trojan horse.
Oh, yeah. I remember that one from like grade school.
So, the Greeks, they pretended to retreat.
Right.
They left behind this massive wooden horse as like a peace offering.
Right.
The Trojans, they thought they had won. They thought they had outsmarted the Greeks.
They brought it into their city.
They brought it right into their city.
Yeah.
And of course, little did they know, it was filled with Greek soldiers.
And they were.
Who came out at night and sacked the city.
Oh, man, what a play.
Right. And that's a perfect example of like seeming dumber or weaker than you actually are.
To get what you want.
To achieve your goal.
Okay. So this is like, we're talking about some pretty like strategic stuff here.
Mm-hmm. This is a high-level power play.
Yeah. I'm starting to see how this book could be pretty dangerous in the wrong hands.
Oh, absolutely. This is not a book for the faint of heart.
Right. Like you have to be careful with this information.
You have to be very discerning about how you apply these laws.
Right. Okay, let's talk about Law 33.
Yeah.
This one I think is the most kind of like
Oh, yeah.
intense
one.
It's called Discover Each Man's Thumbscrew.
Ooh, that's a good one.
This is getting into like some pretty deep psychological stuff.
It is. It's
Yeah.
about finding people's weaknesses.
Right.
Their vulnerabilities, their insecurities.
Their pressure points.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And using that to your advantage.
Okay. We are definitely in ethically gray territory here.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like this is some like, supervillain stuff.
Yeah, it can be used for evil, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to use this law, you got to be very careful.
You got to be very mindful because you can really hurt people with this, right? Like this is the kind of stuff that can ruin relationships.
Absolutely.
Ruin careers.
Yeah.
It can destroy lives.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful.
So like how do we even approach this law ethically? Like is it even possible?
That's a good question. And I think it depends on your intentions.
Okay.
If you're using this law to manipulate and control people,
Yeah.
then that's obviously not ethical.
Right.
But if you're using it to understand people better,
Okay.
to empathize with them,
Right.
to connect with them on a deeper level,
Okay.
then I think it can be used for good.
So it's like anything else.
It's a tool.
It's a tool. And it can be used for good or for evil.
Right.
It depends on the wielder.
Right.
Okay, I'm getting a little bit scared of this book now.
Powerful stuff.
It is powerful stuff, but I think it's important to talk about these things.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I think a lot of times these power dynamics are happening,
Mm-hmm.
whether we're aware of them or not.
All the time.
Yeah. And so I think by bringing them to light, we can at least start to have a conversation about them.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the goals of the book is to make the invisible visible.
Right.
To make people aware of these dynamics that are always at play.
So we can make more informed decisions about how we want to engage.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're back, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around all those laws.
I know. It's a lot to take in.
It's a lot. It's fascinating, though.
Yeah, it's really thought-provoking.
One of the things I really appreciate about this book
Yeah.
is that Greene uses so many historical examples.
Oh, yeah, he's a master storyteller.
He is, and it makes it so much easier to understand these abstract concepts.
Totally. Because you can see how they played out in real life.
Right. It's not just theory. It's like, okay, this is how people actually used these laws.
Yeah, like these aren't just made-up ideas. He's pulling from history. He's pulling from biography
To make his point.
to illustrate these principles.
Yeah. Okay, so spill the tea. Do you have a favorite anecdote from the book?
Oh, there are so many good ones, but one that always sticks with me is the story of Otto von Bismarck.
Okay, I've heard of him, but I don't really know who he was.
So he was this Prussian statesman in the 19th century,
Okay.
and he basically engineered the unification of Germany.
Wow, that's a big deal.
Yeah, he was a master strategist.
Okay.
And his story is a perfect example of one of the laws, Law 13.
Okay, what's Law 13?
When asking for help, appeal to people's self-interest, never to their mercy or gratitude.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But it's basically saying, like, if you want someone to do something for you,
Yeah.
don't beg them, don't try to guilt them into it.
Okay.
Figure out what's in it for them and frame your request in a way that benefits them.
So it's all about framing.
It's all about framing. It's all about understanding people's motivations.
Right.
So back to Bismarck. So he needed King Wilhelm I's support to pull off this whole unification plan.
Okay.
But Wilhelm was a pretty cautious guy.
Yeah, makes sense.
He didn't want to start any wars. He didn't want to upset the balance of power in Europe.
Right.
So Bismarck knew that he couldn't just appeal to the king's sense of, like, patriotism or duty.
Yeah, that wouldn't have worked.
No, he had to appeal to his self-interest.
Okay, so what did he do?
So he basically argued that a unified Germany wouldn't just be good for Prussia.
Mm-hmm.
It would make Wilhelm a legend.
Ooh, playing to the ego.
Exactly. He basically said, look, if you do this, you'll go down in history as the guy who created a new German empire.
I mean, who wouldn't want that?
Right, and it worked. Wilhelm was totally swayed by this promise of glory and a legacy.
And Germany was unified.
Boom, unified Germany.
That's a great example.
Right, it shows how powerful it can be to understand what motivates people.
Yeah, like you said, it's all about framing.
It's all about framing, and I think this is something that we can all apply in our own lives.
Right, like if you want your boss to give you a raise, don't just go in there and say, I deserve a raise.
Right.
Figure out how giving you a raise will benefit the company.
Exactly. Make it about them, not about you.
Okay, that's a good tip. But this brings up a point that I think we need to address.
Yeah, what's that?
These laws, they're effective,
Mm-hmm.
but they can also be pretty ethically complex.
Oh, absolutely. Like we've been talking about, this is not a book for the faint of heart.
Right, like some of these laws can feel pretty ruthless.
They can.
And I'm wondering, like, how do we reconcile that with, our own sense of morality?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yes.
Like, where's the line between being strategic
Mm-hmm.
and just being straight up manipulative?
Exactly.
I don't know if there's an easy answer to that.
Yeah.
I think it's something that every reader has to grapple with.
Yeah.
You have to define your own ethical boundaries.
Yeah, like what are you willing to do?
Exactly. What are you comfortable with?
Because I think we've all seen people who take this kind of stuff too far.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And it's not pretty.
It's not. It can be really damaging.
Right. So I think it's important to approach this book with a critical eye.
Totally. Like, don't just take everything at face value. Think about the potential consequences of using these laws
In different situations.
in different contexts. Yeah, because what might be effective in one situation
Right.
might be completely inappropriate in another.
It's all about context.
It's all about context, and it's all about your own personal ethics.
Okay, so we're talking about some pretty heavy stuff here.
We are. This is not a light read.
It's not, but I think it's an important one.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because I think a lot of times we go through life
Mm,
without really understanding the forces that are at play.
the invisible forces.
Yeah, and this book is kind of like shining a light on those forces.
It's like giving you X-ray vision.
Yeah, so you can see how the game is being played.
And then you can decide how you want to play.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about some pretty specific laws,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to zoom out a little bit
Okay.
and talk about some of the broader themes of the book.
Yeah, what do you see as like the big takeaways?
To me, it seems like this book is not just about manipulation.
Right.
It's about understanding human nature.
Yeah, like it's almost like a psychology textbook in a way.
It is. It's about like figuring out what makes people tick.
What motivates them? What are their fears? What are their desires?
Yeah, and then using that knowledge to your advantage.
To navigate the world more effectively.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like having a secret decoder ring for human behavior.
Totally. And I think that's one of the things that makes this book so valuable, even if you don't agree with all of the laws.
Right.
It gives you this framework for understanding people that can be really helpful in all areas of your life.
So it's not just about like climbing the corporate ladder.
Right.
It's about like having better relationships.
Absolutely. Being more persuasive.
Being more influential.
Yeah.
In all areas of your life.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this book could be useful even for people who aren't like aspiring CEOs or politicians.
Totally. I think it's a book for anyone who wants to understand how the world works.
Right.
And how to navigate it more effectively. Yeah. And I think one of the most important takeaways from the book is that power is not static.
It's fluid. It's constantly shifting.
So we have to be adaptable.
We have to be able to adjust to changing circumstances.
Because the rules of the game are always changing.
They are. And if you're not paying attention, you're going to get left behind.
So it's not enough to just read this book once.
Right.
You have to keep coming back to it.
You have to keep studying it.
Yeah, and keep applying the lessons
your own life.
In a way that feels authentic and ethical to you.
Exactly, because ultimately that's what it's all about.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have. It's been a wild ride.
It has.
Yeah.
When we come back, we'll wrap things up and leave our listeners with some final thoughts. All right, so we are back and
just reveal
ready to tie up all these loose ends from the 48 Laws of Power.
Wrap it all up, bring it all home.
Because we've talked about some pretty intense stuff.
We have. It's heavy stuff.
It is, but I think
it's good, though. It's good.
It's important.
It's important to be aware of these things.
Definitely.
And I think one of the things that has really struck me throughout this conversation is that Greene is not just
I think you're right.
giving us like a how-to guide for manipulation.
No. He's not saying like go out and be a jerk.
Right. It's more nuanced than that.
It's much more nuanced than that.
It's more about like understanding the forces that are at play.
That are already there.
In all human interactions.
It's like he's saying like, look, this stuff is happening whether you like it or not.
Right.
So you might as well be aware of it.
Right.
And understand how to play the game.
Yeah, because if you don't know the rules,
you're going to get played.
You're going to get played. Exactly. So I appreciate that he's kind of like bringing this stuff to light.
Yeah. Shining a light on the shadows.
Exactly.
The underbelly of human behavior.
So let's talk about some of those like key takeaways. Yeah. What do you think are some of the most important things that people should remember from this book?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is that power is not this like...
It's not a thing.
Static thing.
It's not a possession.
Right. It's not something you just have.
No, it's not like a, like a magic wand that you can just wave around.
Right. It's more dynamic.
It's much more dynamic. It's fluid. It's constantly shifting.
It's relational.
It's relational.
Yeah, it exists between people.
Yeah, it's all about how you interact with other people.
Right. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
It is. It's not about dominating people.
Right.
That's about understanding.
Understanding and influencing.
Yeah, and navigating those relationships.
So what do you think are some of the other like big lessons from this book?
Well, I think one of the things that Greene really emphasizes is the importance of self-awareness. Like you have to know yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, your motivations.
If you're going to play the game.
If you're going to play the game effectively, you have to know what you're bringing to the table.
Right. Because I think a lot of times we're so focused on other people that we forget to look inward.
It's easy to get caught up in like what other people are doing.
Right.
But if you don't understand yourself, you're going to be blindsided.
Yeah. So self-awareness is key.
Absolutely. And I think another important lesson is that you have to be adaptable.
Okay.
Like the world is constantly changing.
The rules of the game are always changing.
The rules of the game are always changing. And if you're not willing to adapt, you're going to get left behind.
So it's not enough to just read this book once.
Right.
And be like, okay, I got it.
You have to keep coming back to it.
You have to keep learning.
Keep learning, keep growing, keep evolving.
Yeah, because the game never ends.
It never ends.
And I think that's one of the things that I find both exciting and terrifying.
I know. It's kind of like a double-edged sword.
It is.
It's exciting because it means that there's always opportunity. But it's also terrifying because it means that you can never really rest on your laurels.
You always have to be on your toes.
You always got to be one step ahead.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of like really heavy concept.
Stuff.
Deep stuff. I want to end on a more positive note.
Yeah, bring it home.
Greene talks about how knowledge is power.
He does.
And I think that's true.
I agree.
But I also think that wisdom is knowing how to use that power.
That's the key. It's not just about having power, it's about using it responsibly.
Exactly. And so I think that's the challenge for all of us.
It is.
As we go out into the world.
To use our power for good.
To use our power for good. To make the world a better place.
To make a positive impact.
To lift each other up.
To create a more just and equitable world.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into
this is a good one.
The 48 Laws of Power.
I'm glad we did this.
Me too. And to our listeners.
Yeah.
If you're intrigued by this conversation,
definitely check out the book.
I highly recommend checking out the book.
It's a lot to digest, but it's worth it.
It is. And just remember that knowledge is power.
Yeah.
But wisdom is knowing how to use that power responsibly.
That's the key.
All right. Thanks for listening.